organising this event. I think it's proving very successful. There's obviously a lot to say, a lot to talk about. And I'd also like to thank the poster presenters for this strand, because what I'm going to do is offer a few reflections of my own, but then I've picked out some of the, what for me were the key words and key expressions in some of the posters that give me things to think about and food for thought from the point of view of challenges. In a way, I feel like I've got the hardest task and the easiest one. I mean, we've already talked about so many challenges, even in the first strand. So really, there's no difficulty, I don't think, in finding challenges to talk about. The difficulty is probably there's only 15 minutes, and so it has to be fairly narrowly focused. What I would I'd like to start where David ended, actually, because I think that underlying all the challenges that we face in research is precisely this messiness of research, something that Sian raises in her poster and raised in her abstract as well. And it's this messiness and complexity that can seem to be very daunting and offer many challenges. I should also say at this point that I am very much a qualitative researcher. Although I was actually quite good at maths at school, since then something seems to have happened, and the way my brain's wired, it just doesn't seem to be able to get round the idea of statistics and things. So anytime I have any numbers in anything I do, I have to get somebody else in to do them for me, and then I have to trust that they've done them right. So I'm talking very much from the point of view of a qualitative researcher here. And I think that it's this messiness and the complexity of research that offers us challenges, yes, but is also an amazing opportunity, and is also what makes qualitative research so exciting, so unpredictable. And as somebody who actually is quite happy with unpredictability and doesn't mind unpredictability, I find that something very positive. My students don't always find it so positive, and I often find myself being asked questions like, well, what if I don't find anything? Or what if my data don't say what I expect them to? And my answer is always, of course, but it doesn't matter. Whatever, you'll find something interesting. Working with humans, working on human interaction is inherently interesting and fascinating for me, and there's always something interesting to find and to say, don't panic, is the answer. The messiness, I think, comes a lot, and the challenges come a lot out of working with people. People are notoriously unpredictable and badly behaved compared to a set of texts. I remember many years ago I was working on a project where I was doing a case study of 2 teachers, and I was working very closely with these teachers. I'd been working with them for quite a long time. I was doing a study on teacher cognition, so I observed them, I interviewed them. I also knew them. They were colleagues, they were friends, I knew them very well. And one evening I was sitting in one of my colleagues' offices waiting to go into class to observe one of her classes, and about 5 minutes before class she disappeared. I thought, oh, she's gone to the toilet. Anyway, 10 minutes later she still hadn't come back, and I realised she'd gone into class without me and not said a word. So what do you do with that kind of, well, passive resistance, I would say, in that case, which I was extremely surprised about. So that is a challenge, I think, that we face, is how we deal with people. What I did in that case was, well, I thought, I was in a bit of a dilemma. I thought, well, do I not go? Is this a message that she doesn't want me to go? And I thought, well, no, she said all along, you know, we've been cooperating for a long time. So I just sneaked into the back and sat at the back for her class. But it's a challenge with how we deal with people and how we work with people, how we approach them, how we find them. And I think that is one of the key challenges that we face. Another challenge that I faced personally has been in working in international contexts. I was very lucky with a British Council project that we did with Anne Burns and Fiona Copland with teaching English to young learners. And that raised, for me, a number of issues, ethically speaking. Ethics has been raised already as a challenge that people face. And it raised an ethical challenge because, of course, views of ethics in different countries are very different. And I think it's very important to bear in mind that there can be very often a difference and a dissonance between what's required by our own institutions to jump through the sort of ethical approval hoops and what's actually culturally acceptable in different countries that we're working in. And again, that's something that we have to negotiate. As part of this project, I was working in a primary school. I was observing and talking to teachers in a primary school in Tanzania, near Iringa, a fairly sort of rural school. And I dutifully had my consent form from Aston. They have to fill in. And the head teacher took the consent form. We used loco parentis, so the head teacher could sign on behalf of all the children. And she took the form and she sat with it for a bit in her office. And then one of the teachers walked past and she waved him in and she showed it to him and she said, "What do you think I should do?" And he said something, this was in Swahili anyway, and off he went. And then another one came in and she called him in and said, "What do you think I should do?" Then she took it to the staff room and she showed it to everybody and she said, "What do you think we should do?" And they all said, "Oh no, fine, it's fine, it's fine." Anyway, it turned out that all this discussion and all the problem was because I was asking for permission to take photographs in the classrooms. And she said to me, "I'm sorry," she said yes, she consented in the end, she said, "Yes, we will," but she said, "I'm worried that people are going to laugh at us." And that was the whole thing that she was worried about, was she thought that because it asked for permission to take photographs, to use them in presentations, and I'll show you one later. And she said the whole thing was that she was worried that people were going to laugh at them, because of course they have very little in their classroom. So again, the different pathways that we have to follow through the research journeys that we make and the challenges that we have to face as we go through them. So those are just two of the challenges that I've faced. And I'd like to just say a few things about some of the things that struck me from the posters. And one is action research and the challenges, the specific challenges that I think action research presents. The relationship between the researched, if you like, the informant, the participant, the terminology we want to use, and the researcher. David's question of what counts of good data collection. The challenge of writing is on one of our posters as well. And then finally, I'd just like to say a few words about sharing, because I think in many ways, perhaps not the sort of sharing that Daniel and Stephanie are actually talking about on their poster, but I think sharing, as was mentioned in the first strand, is actually one of the ways that we can overcome many of the challenges that we face, and particularly at events like this, where we can share experiences that we realise that we're not alone so much. So just, I think the answers, all these posters and all the discussions we've had have presented lots of questions, and I don't think David or Cynthia or I, any of us can supply any answers. The only answer we can ever supply is it depends. Because every research and every researcher is different. Sorry, no answers. Every piece of research, every research context is different and unique in its own way. And it depends what the purpose, the answer is going to depend on things like what the purpose of the research is, who it's for, what the benefits are that you hope to achieve. And it's questions like this that only you can answer as a researcher, I think. So ultimately, the way to overcome the challenges is something that each of us individually has to find. Also, I think another thing is also what counts as research, but maybe we won't go there today. That's one of my little hobby horses at the moment, but maybe we can talk about that one. or let me just tell you another story then. I'll just tell you another quick story here. I've just rotated off the research committee. I was chair of the research committee of the International TESOL Association for 3 years. I've just finished my stint there. And we also do a pre-conference research workshop there. And a couple of years ago, Diane Larson-Freeman came along to the workshop. And we always start our workshop with some vignettes, and we say, is this research or isn't it research? And it's a variety of things. You know, it's a teacher takes notes on her class, changes something, and then there's changes something and then sees if it works, and there's another one where somebody collects lots of questionnaires and analyses them, and there's little vignettes like that. And we always go around and discuss, is this research, isn't this research? And Diane stood up and she said they're all research. Because she said any teacher, anything that a teacher investigates in any way in their class, in their teaching, is research. So I had to do that one there. Okay, actually, in a way, this kind of follows on, I suppose, in what counts as research. And I think one of the challenges we face in classroom-based research and in teacher research is what is accepted as research. And very often, for example, action research, and the poster we have, Neophytis' poster, shows certainly the benefits, and I think there are a lot of people in this room doing action research. I've heard people, or exploratory practice as well, as a form of practitioner research, which is extremely beneficial to teachers and to practitioners. But it's very often considered as second-class research. There tend to be judgments of what's good and bad research. But my argument again is, well, who benefits? If it's beneficial to the people doing it, then surely that's what counts and that's what we need to be focusing on. The big challenge is how we then get those results, I think, out there. How do we get them? It's all very well, I think it's great for teachers to be doing research in their own classrooms and to be developing their own practice, but wouldn't it be great if that could then be shared much more widely? And one of the challenges I think we face is how to get that sort of research shared, and maybe we need to be thinking about different ways and different genres. I have no easy answers to that. So I think that's one aspect, and that's the classroom in Tanzania, by the way. I see nobody's looking. Sean raises the issue of the relationship between the researcher and the informant, and in particular in interpretive research, when we're doing interpretive research, whose interpretation is it? Whose reality is it? Whose presentation is it? And I think these are huge challenges that we need to think about as well. It comes back to the complexity and the messiness. And of course, in this kind of research, there's no such thing as neutrality. There's no such thing as a neutral researcher, in spite of what a lot of the research methods books might try to tell you. There's no such thing, I don't think, as a neutral interviewer. Fiona Copland and I realised a couple of years ago that all the research methods and all the articles about interviewing, who make suggestions about relationships, never take into account the fact that very often in our field, the people you're interviewing, you actually have other relationships with them. They're friends, they're colleagues, they're people you already know. So any attempt to try and assume that neutral interviewer role is doomed to failure before you even start. It would be extremely artificial. So that's, how many of you actually work with people, your research informants, if you like, for want of a better word, are people you actually know or have other relationships with? Yeah, you see, in our field, that's really common. And there's very little help. We found there was very little help in the literature with that kind of relationship. It wasn't really acknowledged. And in fact, we did actually write an article about that, and we've presented some data from our own interviews, which are anything but neutral. One possible solution maybe to the challenge of the interpretation is the idea of co-researchers, of having teachers and researchers working alongside each other as co-researchers, or even researchers and learners. I mean, the work of Anna Maria Pinter and Harry Kuchar, for example, with young learners, they've both done projects where the learners themselves have been co-researchers. Maria Brisk, just to give one example, in the US, has been doing work where teachers are co-researchers, and they are together in an equal relationship, as equal as it can be in the circumstances in which we work, I would say. So the interpretations are actually built together, rather than being a researcher's interpretation, which is then member-checked or whatever. So that, I think, is another aspect and another challenge, with perhaps a possible solution this time. Good data collection is another issue that's been raised. What constitutes good data collection? David raises that in his poster. And I think that's a huge part of the messiness and complexity of any form of research. I think my ex-colleague Julian Edge, many years ago, to our master's students, used to give the advice with their reading as to what they needed to read, was that good references or important references were the ones that you could get hold of. And I think there's a sense in which we can say the good data is the data you can get hold of. Because of the constraints and the possibilities that we have, very often it's not possible to get the data if any such thing as perfect data exists. So good data is what you can get. You may not be able to get to exactly the people you want to get to. I don't think that matters. You'll get to interesting, as I said before, human relationships, human behaviour is inherently interesting. You will be able to get some data, and the good data is what you can get. Questions such as what data, how much, my students are constantly asking me, how many informants do I need? And my extremely unhelpful answer is always, as many as you need to answer your research question. They hate that answer. But I'm not sure that there is a better answer. I don't think there is a better answer. Again, it depends. It's an individual journey. It's an individual experience that will depend on each project. Okay, Vola raises the issue of writing, the challenge of writing up research. And as far as I'm concerned, any tips welcome there, because I hate writing as much as she did. I've always found writing perhaps one of the biggest challenges, and I'm probably happier now that I've actually managed to admit to myself that I actually don't like writing very much. I love doing the research. I love doing it. I love being out there with the people. I love meeting people, talking to people, learning things, understanding. But when it comes to writing it up, I do find that so any tips? Well, I'm going to go read her post first and see how you come to love writing. And then finally, I think the final point in the posters we have in this strand is the idea of sharing. And as I said, I don't think this is perhaps what Stephanie and Daniel were particularly meaning with their poster. But I do think, as was mentioned in the first strand, that sharing is one of the key ways in which we can overcome the challenges in research. Whether that's sharing in the sense of being co-researchers working with other people, whether it's sharing in the sense of writing together rather than writing individually. That's one way I've managed to overcome my reluctance to write, is by writing with other people. I find that, I enjoy that, I find that much more enjoyable. Whether it's sharing in fora like this, where you share your ideas, but I do think that sharing is one of the ways in which we can overcome many of the challenges that we face in research. Thank you.